Hi everyone. I was asked by a viewer if I would share how I use the log cabin technique to make scrap quilt blocks. And I'm happy to share that technique because it's a wonderful way to work. In a traditional log cabin, there's a red square in the center, and then the strips are all cut very evenly. But when you're doing scrap quilts by using this technique, it's much freer because we're not aiming for this real strong pattern like in the traditional blocks. So what I like to do is find something fun to substitute for that red square in the center. I'm just checking to make sure my camera's in the right spot. So, and these are some of the blocks I made in the video that went awry yesterday. But what I like to do is I love to look for a strong print like this that has this wonderful design in the center. Let's see, which way did I cut this yesterday? Oops. And because I like to put this in the center because it really helps pull all your blocks together, just as the red center in a traditional block does. So I'm always on the prowl for motifs like this. I have a little scrap bin down here next to my cutting table, because we are lucky to live in a community where we have curbside recycling that also takes fibers. Okay, so this is enough to get started, and there's a bird, a very unusual bird call outside. I'm sorry for being so distracted. So I've reached into my scrap bin, and when I first start out, long strips in this technique are a great blessing, but this is also a way you can use up tiny scraps if you segregate them away from the center. So what I'm going to do is grab my motifs and start sewing them on to these little squares. So when you're sorting your scraps, if you sort them at all, pull aside the tiny ones that you can use on these earlier blocks. Oh, I got a salvage there, so. Now, in practice, you want to run to the ironing board and press after every long bout of sewing session. But I'm going to do this one pretty quickly, so I'm going to wait on that step. So then you cut your motifs apart. Let's set those aside. Here's a little one I've got down here. You could finger press in the meantime. And you open them up, and then you run to your scraps again and find something that will work. I don't need one that long right now, but how about this one? This is an oddly shaped one. And you put your piece down. I don't think I can get another one from that one, but someone has said it's boring watching me sew, and another person said it's relaxing watching me sew. So I'm trying to do a compromise between the two things. Okay, so I've got these weirdo scraps sewn on here, so I'm just going to trim these so you don't have to worry about how wide your strips are or anything, but you do want to keep them all fairly straight, although you don't have to. That's the cool thing about this technique. There's no have-tos. And you'll see this one isn't even on the straight of grain, but that on a small piece of fabric, that doesn't matter much. So as my pieces get larger, then I'm going to start looking for longer strips. Like this one would be very nice. And when you're choosing where to go next, I've done 1, 2, and now I'm going to add strip 3, so it's going to go on this edge. I'm going to flip that on my strip here. Normally when I'm chaining this thing, I will cut out a whole strip of those center blocks and just keep sewing strips on until I have a lot of them done, and then I'll run to the ironing board. Now, the person that contacted me about this video does not have a lot of scraps yet, unlike me, who just has giant bags of them. And I would like to suggest to her that if she belongs to a quilting community, to put out the call, and I bet bags of scraps might start appearing on her doorstep. I'm just eyeballing this, which is good enough for this technique. Because if your seams are a little bit askew, it just makes them more interesting. Okay, so we can see, well, I guess I sewed this onto the wrong side here. See, I should have sewn it on this side, but it doesn't matter. Because we don't care if these motifs are right in the center. The blocks will be interesting and fun whether they are or not. Well, okay, so ideally, I've got 1, 2, and 3, so here would be the 4th side. So I'm going to sew those on, and then I'll be back in a minute to show you another thing. So I've been all around my block once, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so the way you know where the next strip should go is on the side with the shortest block here, usually. Probably almost always on this. And so then the next strip will be on this side. I don't know if I'd use the green on here. I think I know I shared with you in that initial video that it's easier to design with these blocks if you stay within the same color family, kind of, like if this was all an orangish, yellowish block. And how big you want to make your block is kind of dependent on your scraps and also the size of your center block. And I like to work to the size of my rulers. And I know that this block would be very nice, 9.5 inches. But I think I'm going to make these blocks 8.5 inches just because I already have hundreds sewn that are 8.5 inches, and I could add these in with that stash. So I'm going to keep circling around until I know I keep my ruler on the table, or you can use your mat and just keep looking through till you know you've got that 8.5. So I really just need one more strip here, which I will do. So I'm going to work on these blocks a little more, and then I'll come back and show you what I've got. One other thing I wanted to share with you that I forgot to say is when I started going through my massive piles of scraps, I'm also on the prowl for pieces that are big enough to cut a 4.5 inch square out of, because I also love using that diagonal technique that was in an earlier video with these 4.5 inch squares. When you make a bed quilt out of these squares with the colors running diagonally. It makes for a very dynamic quilt. Okay, so I kept sewing strips on until I could tell by comparing to my 8.5-inch ruler that they were at least 8.5 inches square. And the next step would be to take my ruler and square these all up. One thing, I love quilting techniques where you don't have to have perfect 1/4-inch seam allowances, because I'm not perfect that way. But when you trim them up, you keep sewing your blocks and then you trim them up to that perfect size as the last step. Well, then I do aim for a perfect 1/4-inch seam allowance then. And because there's so much fewer that have to be perfect, your quilt's going to come out pretty wonderfully since you've cut them square that way. I love techniques like that where you sew, and then make them perfect as the last step. Okay, good. I hope I've answered my viewers' questions on how to do this technique, and thank you for watching, and hit like and subscribe if you're enjoying the videos. Okay, thank you. Bye.